Thank you for joining us tonight. I'm Priya Kamolkar. I'm one of the co-directors of Fusion, as well as the co-head of Alumni Relations, and this is Rachel Brown. She's also a co-head of Alumni Relations. And we're here celebrating Fusion Film Festival, celebrating women in film, TV, and new media. So the Fusion Alumni Network is the natural extension of relationships built through the passionate work of Fusion's mission. And with great pride brings us the powerful work of our own family of artists, alumni of Tisch and Fusion, who have trained and grown as artists in this very building. An integral part of continuing these relationships with support and her role as a mentor to the alumni is our amazing faculty advisor, Susan Singer.
It's so great to see everyone here tonight. On the back of your program, you'll see the opening of submissions for Fusion through February 19th. 13 categories of competition, including a Docs in the Works event that happens in this room, where finalists get to pitch their projects in the works to the most exciting executives in the doc world, and it's for an audience. It's a really thrilling event and a great opportunity. All of Fusion's competitions are open to NYU students and alumni 3 years out of school. So that's one of 13 very cool competitions that you can participate in. I also want to give a shout out to the Horizon Award, which is an award that is offered to women who want to attend Sundance with full fare and incredible treatment by a wonderful array of women who support women. And you can find the information about the Horizon Award at horizonaward.com. Some of our honorary board are involved in supporting that award. I'm so excited to have Emma here and her crew tonight. I saw this film at the Nantucket Film Festival, where it walked away with the Audience Award and just absolutely was the buzz of the festival. So it's such a proud night for our school to have this amazing team here.
Thank you, Susan. So Fusion's goal is to celebrate the work of women we deeply admire, which brings us to our extraordinary event tonight, a masterclass with the creative team of the hit documentary Monkey Business.
So Curious George is the most popular monkey in the world, but the story of his creators is largely unknown. Hans and Margaret Ray were a husband and wife team, German Jews, global refugees, and immigrants to America. On makeshift bicycles carrying the original Curious George manuscript, they rode across Nazi-occupied Europe in search of freedom. Using animation, archival materials, and interviews, Monkey Business, The Adventures of Curious George's Creators, explores the extraordinary lives of the Rays, who were as curious and adventurous as George himself. The team behind Monkey Business was mostly from the Tisch class of 2012. The film took 3 years to make, including a rigorous Kickstarter campaign that raised over $180,000. The film premiered at the LA Film Festival in 2017 and has received the Audience Choice Award at the Nantucket Film Festival. Distributed by The Orchard, the film is now available in over 60 countries, and in the US is available on Hulu, iTunes, and Amazon. And today we have the creative team of Monkey Business for this wonderful masterclass. And after the masterclass, we will have a brief catered reception in the lobby. Okay, an extended catered reception in the lobby where you came in. So without further ado, here is the creative team of Monkey Business.
Hello everyone, thank you so much for coming. My name is Ema Ryan Yamazaki. I'm the director of Monkey Business. I'm also the class of Tisch 2012, and it's amazing to be back. Like, we were just talking that this room is, a place you take class when you're 18, for sure, and it's like amazing that somehow I'm sitting on this side. Not so, it's only been a few years really. We graduated 5 years ago. We're all 27, 28 years old here. So it's really exciting to be back. Thank you to Susan and Fusion for bringing us here. yeah, a little bit about myself, and we're gonna talk today about kind of how the film went from an idea, an ambition, to it being like a real film. Like, it's on Hulu, that's amazing. So, and then also kind of go into the various creative aspects of it. We have Jacob and Janice, who are the animation team, the core of it, as well as a few of actually our workers, our other animators also in the audience. And then we have Annie here, who ran the Kickstarter campaign that really was the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. You will see me cry today in some videos, hopefully not in person. And we also have Emily, who's one of the producers of the film, and she really pulled together the archival footage of this film, as well as just all the stuff like you need to do, like legal stuff, paperwork, getting the festival strategy together, all sorts of stuff. So we're gonna go through step by step. Just briefly, out of Tisch, I was lucky enough to be Sam Paula's assistant. So if you know Sam Paula, who teaches here, that's how I started my career, as his assistant, then his associate editor, then he kind of pushed me into the world of New York documentary, TV and film editing. It was within the first 2 years after I graduated. I'd been an editor on like shows on CNN and PBS and HBO, and I was ready to make my first feature. That's how this started. I'm gonna first show you the trailer of the film, and then we'll get going.
This is George. He was a good little monkey and always very curious.
This is Hans and Margaret Ray, and Curious George was their creation.
He's not a typical animal. He's a curious monkey who, through his curiosity, gets himself into trouble, and through his own ingenuity, gets himself out of trouble.
Margaret did the storytelling. It was Hans who was the artist.
The idea that I could watch him magically create Curious George was very special.
She cut all of the deals and pushed her way into publishers and held their feet to the fire.
It was sort of like he was all the sugar and Margaret all the spice.
I think their devotion to each other was what they had been through.
We're living in France when we did the first Curious George. George was really born in France.
Everybody thinks Curious George is such an American icon, but he was created by German Jews who lived in Paris, took him through Brazil, and then brought him to the United States. So he's as much of an immigrant as anyone.
But as George came to life, the distant danger was fast approaching.
The Germans were invading extraordinarily quickly. You could hear the tanks rolling in as they were bicycling out. Everywhere they went, they were suspect.
I'm pretty damn sure it was George who saved us there.
George was their child, and she was the first to see that Curious George could become a cultural icon.
They didn't search to the moon to find what was spectacular. What was spectacular was around them.
Isn't it amazing that all of this came out of that little book so many years ago? There are George's adventures, but then there are the Ray's adventures.
Okay. So that's the trailer. How the project started. I was actively looking. You have to actively look for a story to tell, I think, when you're ready to make your first feature. I'd made short docs, and I'd been involved in these epic, long broadcast doc series, and I was ready to find a story that would be my own to tell, with me in charge. I'd been part of really big projects as like a soldier, and I was kind of ready to do this. And I was brainstorming with people, I was reading articles online, and one day, a good friend of mine that I was brainstorming with asked me if I knew anything about the Curious George authors. Now, I grew up in Japan, and I'd read Curious George as a kid, and I assumed he was a Japanese monkey. It was way later when I came to the US that I did realize that he was being claimed by many, many countries around the world, but I didn't know anything about the authors. I think, we don't, unless we're given the opportunity, we don't actually ask like who writes these great children's books. And this friend was like, they were husband and wife, they were German Jews who fled the Nazis on bicycles. And I was like, what? And I Googled to watch the film. I assumed there was already a film, like such a great story, I gotta watch it. And I Googled multiple times before I realized it wasn't a film. And not only that, not that much information. There was a book for teenagers about their life, and that was really it. And this friend of mine, her mother was in the same old, like assisted living old people's home as the person who runs the estate now. And that's how she knew about it. And it was very soon that I was on a bus to Cambridge, Massachusetts, to just talk to her and learn more about them. As I learned the scope of the story, it did take me, I was 23 at the time. I was ready for this, but Curious George, I felt like first I had to be very secretive. I felt like if Alex Gibney found out he was gonna make the film, I was really scared. So I was like very secretive, and I also did have some hesitation. Okay, so can I take this on? I remember feeling like maybe the story was somehow worthy of someone that was more experienced, or and there was going to be a big Jewish story, and part of me was like, I had all these questions. And it really took some of my closest friends from Tisch. You see in this picture here, he's on set today and he couldn't make it, but Mark, who was one of my best friends, we went to school together, he emailed me officially for the first time in our friendship to write out why he thought I should pursue the project. So it really took a group of my friends for me to realize that I can take this on with their help. Layli, who is in the corner there, she was the woman who runs the estate, and that's my first visit to her. I look like so young and different, but that was in 2014. And then basically it became like, I would hear about someone else that knew them, I would call and then go. I went to Ohio to meet the lady who wrote that book I mentioned earlier, The Journey That Saved Curious George. We went to the University of Southern Mississippi, that's down there with Mark, where there's 300 boxes of the collection of the Ray's personal stuff. And this is all, before I decided to take on the project. There's things you have to do. You have to really take action, I feel like, to pursue a story. This was obviously, no one was paying me to do this. These were flights, these were days off from work, but it seemed totally worth it, even though I didn't really know where I was headed yet. And then basically once I realized, okay, I got to start shooting. And the great thing about docs, I feel like, compared to maybe narrative projects, is that you can do it in parts. It's not like you have to plan one big shoot that costs, $200,000 and you have to go. You can kind of do it in pieces. So I realized that, well, I have some savings, how much is it gonna cost to go for a 3-day shoot to Cambridge, get everybody that I want to interview there and go for it. And then it really started with my own savings to get that. And as we kept going, basically my research was to talk to people who knew the Rays. I must have talked to maybe 50, 60 people. They were long dead. Hans died in 1977, Margaret in 1996. So, but a lot of people still knew them, and it was, there's no official biography or anything about them. So really the film, the research was, talking to these people. So, and, I would talk to them on the phone, but once you're there in the, like some town in Massachusetts or New Hampshire, you might as well start shooting. That was kind of how it felt with the limited resources I had. And so it was really simultaneous. I also spent a lot of time, those boxes again are in Mississippi, where there's a big children's literature collection, and that's where the archive is there. And I just spent weeks there staying in like a motel and like driving for the first time in 10 years just to get places. I would never go, it's like a kind of filmmaking takes you places you never think you'd go, but it was amazing. And I spent just days and days, weeks and weeks there digging through what, journals and letters they wrote each other and other people, trying to piece together who they were. That's the Dick Roman collection, that's where the archives were. And then really trying to figure out how to get things done. So going back to, using my own money. Well, I also, again, going to Tisch, what's so great is, you'll also find if you're still in school, as you leave school, your various friends chooses to kind of invest in various things. Like two of my closest friends decided to invest in buying an Amira camera, and they had that. Some of my other friends bought a bunch of like lighting equipment, same with sound equipment. And you kind of have access to this. Obviously, their goal is to rent it out, charging people to use it. But I was lucky enough, especially with the camera, to have these guys, Mark and Zach, they were a big part of the team, but also it came with something called deferred payment, right? You agree to pay them later. And this film really couldn't have started without a group of people like that willing to, for a few days, at a time, just, I would cover all the expenses. We'll go there, we'd eat decently. It wasn't like we were eating, McDonald's, but like I'll cover the costs, and otherwise everything was extremely cheap or free at the time. This is how I went. And just also figuring out with my schedule, until that point in my career, I'd really been lucky and also chosen to take jobs that were like exciting. I was on TV shows and things like that. And then I decided to do also corporate videos at night, anything that would bring me money. There was a time when I edited a lot of Weight Watcher videos, like all those videos on the website, like you'd see, and you've lost 100 pounds, like, and I would never, that's something, well, now I've said it on live stream, but it's not really something I was boasting about, but it paid. Like Weight Watchers really funded this film to an extent. So there was all of that, we had to just figure out, and we did it in chunks. I did a 3-day shoot there, and then we'd go somewhere else and we'd shoot. And sometimes I'd work out if it's cheaper to fly someone into New York or us to go to that place, things like that, this is all within my means, and I really think now, being back at Tisch, these are all, except for Annie, who I met at a film festival, these are all people that I went to school with, some people I didn't know in school, but just having that Tisch network, once I was looking for animators, everybody knew Jacob, and then Jacob knew Janice, it just, we were all ready, I think, at that time, 2 years out of school, to tackle a big project. And the people that really felt this was exciting and they were willing to do this out of passion is how the team came together. And it's very fortunate. And I think maybe it doesn't happen more than once in your career. It's like something that happens for your first feature. And I'm really lucky that I had those friends to do it. So these are the places we went to shoot, all over the place. I think we shot maybe 25, 30 sit-down interviews. You saw in the trailer, it all looks like, I don't know, hopefully it looks kind of like maybe it was shot in a studio or something. That was like this white background you see in that photo, that's all we had. So we had like a square cloth that we took everywhere. We were shooting in people's homes, we were shooting in hotel rooms, we were shooting in old people's homes, libraries, and it was our choice early on to make that background consistent, because this is a film where the interview subjects aren't as important as the stories they're actually telling. They're not, the interview subjects are just kind of vehicles to tell the Ray's story. So I didn't want it to be distracted by the location they were in. Also, if you see the film, we frequently use the white background to incorporate animated things into it, or photos on the side while someone's talking. Now, while I did have those general ideas as I started to shoot the interviews, it would be a lie to say that I had it worked out. You just have to pick a style. We did tests, we did black screens, green screens, white screens, and picked a white one. But to an extent, when you pick a style, when you don't even know how the film's gonna come together and where it's headed, I have to say it was a combination of, going for a style and then making it work as the film came together. Funding. So we've talked about how I use my, working as an editor, if you get lucky, and I think if you, stick with it and become, go beyond being an assistant, the shock of my parents, I was earning, I feel like, a good day rate, within a couple of years out of Tisch, which might hopefully gives hope to some people in this room. And I was saving, and I realized that, well, I don't know what I'm saving for. I really should just use, this is all I want to do right now, make this film, so let's use it. I've never been so financially risk-taking, traditionally for me, but it just felt like the right thing. And then I did start using credit cards, because I just felt like if I filmed enough, there must be a way that you start getting your money back, or other people start paying for things. But I honestly didn't know. And what I've said repeatedly as this film has come together is this idea that if you wait to start a project until you know how it's gonna go, you know what you're doing. Like for me, I would not have even started yet, So it's really try it, and I'll talk later about some mistakes I made that cost me money, cost me hardships, but it came together. So basically, I made more right choices than wrong, I would say, as I went, even if it was my first time. So my money, my friends' money, as I said, no one got paid in this production for a long time now. Jacob was on this film for 2 years. So I couldn't not pay Jacob. Jacob was full-time working on this film for 2 years. So we basically, for Jacob, I agreed to pay, a certain amount of money that I know he can live in far away in Brooklyn, like that. And I didn't know when he stopped doing anything else how long I could sustain that. But I was working again 2-3 jobs to get this done. So I had this routine as I started editing the film where I would get up. I would edit this film from 5 to 9 a.m. and then I would go to work. I would edit 10 hours and then come home and go to bed. This is what I did, and I did a lot of financial I wasn't picky in my editing and actually started to turn down more intense series TV work because I couldn't also deal with it creatively because I was pouring my heart into editing my own film. So, but those jobs are good, when I had a purpose of what I was earning for, it was really easy to do. And it feels like my editing career was in 2 parts. That second part was really all to fund my film. I did get a fiscal sponsor. Now, what a fiscal, and I had Women Make Movies as my choice. So basically what that allows you to do is they're a nonprofit, so on your behalf they can accept tax-deductible donations. And there's certain grants you can apply to that you can only accept the money if you are a nonprofit. So they kind of, for a small fee, become that vehicle, and sometimes that's an incentive for people to give you money. For the grants, it didn't really have matter for us because I spent an obscene amount of time applying to every grant out there. There's Sundance funding, there's Tribeca funding, what else is PBS, like public television funding.
We applied to almost everything.
Yeah, we applied to everything.
Imagine.
But the thing is, I wouldn't next time if I was making this film, because you have to know what the grants are looking for. I wasted a lot of time applying for grants that, if you look at the recipients, it was clearly, this film is kind of, it's historical, it's animated, there's some unique stuff to it. It's not pressing current affairs, it's not environmental. There's a lot of, there's a tendency to fund those films a lot, and it often got to oh, we were in the final round, but we picked the Syrian refugee documentary, which is understandable. But if I look back, the hours and hours, the days it takes to write up these ridiculous 10, 20-page treatments of a film you haven't made yet, it's easier to do another editing day. It's basically earn. They got to that point with this film. I think it really, when you apply to grants, you just have to know if that's the right, you have the right project for that grant, and they really still isn't, and it takes a long time. You really have to be patient if you're trying to get something done quickly. Grants aren't necessarily the good way. Unfortunately, that was at least my experience. We did also have this community in Waterville Valley, New Hampshire, where the Rays spent their summers for 20, 30 years at the end of their life. I went there many times and started to build this community of people who wanted to support me. And this one couple in particular, offered to host a fundraising event. I went there and I showed these clips, and it was really weird. You're there to ask people for money directly, and then you wait for a few weeks and you check your mailbox every day to see if you got a $5 check, a $100 check. This is a photo of me when I received someone told me they would give me $10,000. That is what you look like when that happens for the first time in your life. I debated sharing this photo, but I just feel I remember, I will never forget this moment, because it's crazy how quickly, we raised $186,000 for Kickstarter a few months later, how quickly you become numb to money in a way. I think, I remember when, you're a student and you're on a budget and you just have, as you kind of move on with your career, like this film cost $600,000 to make, and it's just like you kind of get numb with the numbers. But this was an amazing, I just couldn't believe someone would do that. But they did, and that's what I looked like in that moment, just to share. I also, the one thing that we did get into, which was a turning point for our project, was, there's a festival called Hot Docs. It's one of the biggest North American documentary film festivals. It's in Toronto in April, May every year. They also have a big market and a place where projects that are still being made are pitched. And there's a big central forum, it's called the Forum, where you can pitch in front of a room full of all the money holders in the industry, but there's also a secondary program where you can have like a speed dating. You can meet one-on-one with whoever is willing to meet you, from HBO to, European broadcasters, if that's a fit, to, distributors, and also people like Kickstarter. Basically for me, I met the person who ran the film pages on Kickstarter there. I also met Annie there, who was living in Austin at the time, and she was working for a company that helps, consults filmmakers, but also does helps crowdfunding or runs crowdfunding campaigns. So basically a combination of meeting the Kickstarter person who really said that this would be really great for Kickstarter. They wooed me with this idea that Bill Nye project had just raised $800,000 or something. And I was like, oh, great. Then Curious George, I just felt looking back, even to set the goal at $175,000, I realized it took balls. I can't believe I did it, but I think I was in this space where I really needed it, and Bill Nye, and I don't know. So looking back, it was a combination of things that caused me to do that. But it turned out okay, as I will share. Before I did the Kickstarter, we did have a couple of investors, really, basically 4 investors, ranging from $5,000 to $20,000-$25,000. Nothing epic compared to the total budget, but it really got to the point where I depleted May of 2016 was a dire time for me. I had to, I moved out to an apartment near LaGuardia Airport, on a couch, because it was hard to pay my rent. I was out of all the donations. Thought I would go to Hot Docs and come back with a $500,000 check. Do you remember I used to I might come back, I don't have all these meetings, maybe I'll come back with it. And obviously it takes time, although the feedback was amazing. And I basically, I'd always been open to investors, but they were all friends. They were really all friends who said, okay, why not? And we want to help you. And they kind of know that it's never a good investment, but it's for the journey, and it's better than giving me money. So there were a few people that were really kind, that really tied me over, or I would have, basically not been able to continue with Jacob, which means he could have taken another job. And at that point, it was Jacob's hands, we couldn't replace him. So it was all about how can I keep paying Jacob? And it really came close, I would say. And that was only a year and a half ago. So then, decided to do the Kickstarter. So I hired Annie's company to help me, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. Now Annie lives in New York. She's a film producer. She does all sorts of things, but she doesn't do as many crowdfunding campaigns now. This was the last one. So I caught her on her way out, because it is a lot of work, but she's an expert in kind of how to find money and how to market things. So I'm going to give you also a mic, Annie. However, first I just want to show you a little bit of the pitch video that was on the Kickstarter that I made, just to give you a sense of, and I would say, I'll show you the video first.
And now we're gonna have, you know that friend, who is that? Curious George.
He was a good little monkey, but he was always
Curious. How did you get the idea of Curious George? How did you invent Curious George's name?
Hi, I'm Emma. Like many of you out there, I grew up reading Curious George. I love that monkey. But it was only quite recently that I learned about the story of his creators, Hans and Margaret Way.
Everybody thinks Curious George is such an American icon, and of course he is. But he was created by German Jews who lived in Paris, took him through Brazil, and then brought him to the United States. So he's as much of an immigrant as anyone.
We're living in France when we did the first Curious George. George was really born in France.
The Rays had to leave Paris suddenly in June of 1940, along with 5 million other people, fleeing as the German army came into Paris.
By the time they fled Paris, George was a finished product.
Who made Curious George? I had no idea. I basically became obsessed, I would say, with their story. At the University of Southern Mississippi, there's the Ray collection, which is 300 boxes of things from the Ray's life. Things like wartime journals, things like letters between Hans and Margaret, photos of them, artwork, not just the published George books that we all know, but earlier, previous works that they've done, unpublished George sketches. They kept everything.
My name is Leili Ong, and I'm the literary executor of the Ray Estate.
It took Leili seeing my dedication to the story to really gain her support, and she got really excited with the idea that I was going to be the one that tells the Ray story and do it justice. It's really been a collective effort within the community of people who knew the Rays. All of us have come together to tell the story of the Rays the best way we know how. So there's a little more. And so that there's like 1 minute more maybe, but that interview, Jacob's in it. Yeah, sorry, I'm just. But it took like 10 hours for me to tape that. Like maybe I look okay in it, but that was the beginning of me becoming like this. Like I was not like this. I feel like I had to go get through to like my basic fear of like my English doesn't sound right, like all those fears to do this. And I had to I feel like I had to reinvent who I was to take it on. And that was before the campaign started. Once I launched, I'm got 30 days to raise $175,000 or not, we don't get our money. And it was like very public. Like it felt like if I didn't get it, it was like a public execution because everyone that ever knew me was watching. And I had to, Annie and I really worked on all these things we could do to different ways to ask people for money. But maybe you want to talk a little bit about what one does to set up a campaign, like the importance of social media and finding your audience, things like that.
Well, first of all, hello everybody.
Yeah.
I also just want to mention, Emily reminded me over here, that the Kickstarter, as Emma said, was kind of a big turning point for the film and for her and her team. But she did seriously hustle and raise close to $200K before she started the Kickstarter.
This is just the page
just to
I'm
give you
going
an
through
idea.
But yeah, and another thing too, because Susan mentioned earlier that there's a Send Women to Sundance program, and as a producer that mostly works in distribution and marketing, I would urge you guys to take those opportunities and go to festivals before you have films, understand how festivals work, learn how to network, learn how to meet people. Because you never know who you'll meet at a festival. And this is an example, I went to Hot Docs for another film, and I was doing marketing for that, and everyone was telling me, oh, there's this filmmaker you have to meet. She's working on this documentary about Curious George and Kickstarter. Liz Cook at Kickstarter was telling me, you have to meet Emma. You have to meet Emma. And then I finally connected with you, right, Emma? And you even said the same thing that people were telling you. You have to meet Annie. You have to meet Annie. So you just never know. So take those opportunities as you can to go to festivals. But yeah. So your question was, what was your question, Emma?
Just what it takes to do a Kickstarter campaign.
What it takes. So I could teach an entire semester's course on this subject. But real quick, when Emma came to me, I think the biggest campaign that me and my team, and I didn't do this alone, by the way. I had an incredible partner, Michelle Randolph Fairs at Production for Use, the company that I work with. And she and I, really did this together. She kicked butt. She's also a producer on the film as well as our other teammates, Eric and Melissa. So, I didn't do this alone. But what it takes to do something at this level, where do I start? First, it starts with what Emma was saying earlier of understanding what you're doing by putting yourself out there. Emma, you mentioned, it took a lot for you to understand that you were kind of reinventing yourself and putting yourself in front of this camera. I work with filmmakers all the time, or work with directors all the time, and that is difficult, right, to get in front of the camera for the first time. But it's great practice to start talking about your project and pitching it and believing in what you're doing. So what does it take? It takes a lot of belief in the project the story that you want to tell. It takes getting a community that's going to help, make you work on it. That's something that I brought to the table by working on this with Emma. We first started with breaking down the audience, right, for this film. The obvious audience, the obvious entry was Curious George. Who doesn't know Curious George? So we started there. That was the entry point that any person can make into being interested in this film. If you didn't read Curious George as a kid, your friends were reading Curious George. The second thing that we thought of was, we are telling this remarkable World War II story of German Jews escaping the Nazis. Let's start thinking about folks who are really interested in those stories. At the time, too, this is what's really gnarly, but this was pre-Trump. And over the summer, it was summer 2016, right? I remember thinking, the Holocaust, we still make movies about this, we still tell the story. It's not super, super relevant anymore, but so we try to connect it with, Syrian refugees and how people would be interested in knowing that, Curious George was also an immigrant in a lot of ways, and trying to gain interest in that way. And little did we know that a year later it would become unfortunately, really relevant, which is also an interesting conversation to have. But we broke down the audience, first realizing that the entry was through Curious George, but then there was this great historical component about talking about the Holocaust and Jewish history and the World War II history. And then we spent 3 months full-time working on our social media launch for the film and building an audience prior to launching the campaign.
Yeah, like reaching out to mommy blogs, like parenting blogs, like Jewish outlets, and then also designing rewards. We had an agreement with that state so we could make some limited stuff, and also there was a bunch of artwork, from magnets to t-shirts to beach balls to, and mind you later, when you have to ship out 1,500 magnets individually, right? Like that was us, Paige, an intern at the time, and just at the post office, things like that. But yeah, just planning the reward side of things.
We also spent a lot of time, and this is another thing that a lot of people ask me about crowdfunding campaigns, is press and PR. We spent a lot of weeks working with Kickstarter, working with David Nin at Kickstarter, who runs the PR for the film projects.
I'm just gonna tab through. We got an amazing amount of press, and I'm just gonna kind of go through the tabs. But AP blasted the fact that it was news that I was making this film, and it went to hundreds of outlets around the world. At one point, I'll never forget, the AP app on my phone was the Rio Olympics, Trump, and then that photo of me. It was entertainment news. So there was a lot. People were really interested, which is a big reason of our success.
And we got that because we were working with David very strategically at Kickstarter, saying, we're only going to reach out, we're only going to reach this audience of Curious George fans. And remember that Curious George is for children. And you can't be pitching a Kickstarter to children. They don't have money, they don't have credit cards. So you actually have to be pitching their parents. So how do you get to their parents? And the very obvious way is through, meaningful press pieces that come out. So we were working very closely with David at Kickstarter to get press. In addition to that, our company had hired a freelance, an independent publicist, Kristen O'Brien, who is incredible, and she got us a piece in People magazine. She got us a piece in Uprocks. And then David is the one who launched us into the Associated Press, which everybody picked up, and it was just incredible. And we were getting press all the way in Israel as well. So it was picked up in many different angles. Yes, the Curious George was interesting, but also the story of the Rays that a lot of people didn't know. So we were reaching a lot of the different markets that we knew our film was geared towards, and that was really exciting. And totally not normal either for a Kickstarter.
Right, but people have asked me like day to day what it's like for 30 days, and it's like this. You like get up and you think of different things you haven't done yet to ask people for money. So like the first week is like your friends have like kind of agreed to, and then the second week it stops coming because people are followers, not leaders, and they don't want to be part of something until it looks successful. So we're like doing like hashtag I love that monkey campaigns and like, giving incentives. So like if we reach a certain amount of backers by a certain day, you'll all get a stressed banana squeeze thing. And
but I think that speaks to the point that when you're doing these campaigns, these audience building campaigns, right? Because at the root of it, it's just audience building and engagement. Yes, we're asking for money, but really we're trying to get people interested in a film and trying to get them to, engage online. And so what I always recommend to folks is you have to try millions of things.
Yeah.
So if you have this, squeezing banana idea, run with it. If it doesn't work, move on to the next one.
Yeah,
move
every
on
day.
to the post videos of your child reading
Curious Stories.
And you just wait for the thing that works. Emma mentioned the Bill Nye campaign. We actually consulted with David Alvarado, who is the co-director of that documentary. And we consulted with him and asked, what helped you guys get to 800? What the heck did you do? And it was a Frisby. It was a free Frisby Friday that sort of set that project from, in the 50,000s all the way to the hundreds of thousands within a day. And so we were kind of like, okay, what's ours going to be? We tried everything that we could. And so that's another thing, that when you're thinking about who your audience is, how can I break down my film's market, and how can I engage people, you got to be really creative and open your mind to a lot of different ideas, because you never know what's going to actually hit.
Keep doing things. Like I got to the point where I couldn't eat or sleep. Like I got addicted to, like, if I got a little money, I was so happy. If I didn't for a few hours, I just felt so sick, and like it was a whole roller coaster. Because also towards the end of the campaign, we were like 1 week out, we still needed $100,000. It didn't happen until the last few days, and
which is normal.
Which apparently is normal.
But it's hard.
And and it kept being like, if you make 50%, then most projects make it, because each person just has to like get another person to give that same amount of money, and all this encouragement. Like coaching, I felt like a athlete being coached by like a seasoned coach. But
really, no, I was just like your therapist, right?
Yeah. But it got to the point where you've made all your calls. Everybody has like given money or said no, and people say no, and it's okay. You're calling people all the time. Jacob's messaged all of his Facebook friends, like every single one of them, right? I think. Yeah.
All of us had to do it.
All of us, yeah. All of us had to do it, and then it got to the point where, Emma, be on Facebook Live all the time, because people want to like, it's you, like you people are getting inspired by you. So I was like, literally walking around Manhattan being like, I'm gonna go ask this person for money now, and I just wanna show you a little bit, I realize the time, so I'm gonna keep going, but the video that we were Facebook Living as we made our goal. So I'm just gonna play a little bit of that. I think I will look back on these few minutes and not remember them. I'm really at this state of total gratitude, exhaustion for sure, and just
What? Wait, it did an update. Refresh.
Guys! So we just made our goal.
This is hilarious.
So we just made our goal. And so we go on for a bit. But I watched that like 2 days ago to prepare for this, and I'm like kind of crying now because it brings, it was the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. So like out of making of the film to get there with 23 hours left, and then you also then get a renewed sense that this project you were doing like in your apartment with a couple of friends is like, now you have an obligation to get it done. Like, I was motivated to get it done, but I felt like responsible to do like the best job I could. And from there, we just with this money, we hired a bunch, we had a plan. We had a bunch of the animators, the colorists that filled in these frames that Jacob had been preparing, and we started to like buy archival footage we needed to then animate them in, and we went full speed. And what this also did was, with all this press, by the end of the Kickstarter, we were in talks with multiple distributors and broadcasters who like found the project, and basically out of the Kickstarter campaign, eventually I signed with the Orchard, who gave me basically the rest of the money to get the film done. So it was really more than just this money, because actually $186,000, we probably used a little over $100,000 on the actual film. By the time you pay Kickstarter, you pay Annie's company, you make all these rewards, you ship them, and it's a full 1 month full-time job for like multiple people. So there's definitely, things with that too, but it was worth it because more than the actual money, it just blew. And also the AP article blasted into Brazil on their like printed paper of this small town where my subject Hans's great nephew read it, and I didn't know he was alive and existed, and some of the key photos from Hans's life came out of that relationship because he read me in the AP News, so things like that, unpredictable things that also impacted the film.
Emma, can I just say something real fast about, this is kind of another plug for if you're considering doing a crowdfunding campaign, but more than that, if you're considering doing an audience campaign for either yourself or audience building or for your film, there are so many ways that putting your film out there and starting early to get people aware of your movie, of your film, will help you later. Something that a lot of folks don't know as well is that festival programmers watch crowdfunding campaigns each year, and they kind of find out early about films and then sort of anticipate getting those eventually for submission. So that's another example. So in our case, it was a distributor. It was more content for the film, and it was a ton of press that would, and not to mention thousands of followers that would, once the film is out, would be our champions, would be our ambassadors. So if you are considering, should I start, building social media pages and do audience building for my film? The answer is yes. Start thinking about the best ways that you can do that, because it's more than just that immediate need. There's a domino effect, and then it helps you continue on your career. Again, I said whole semester could be taught.
Yeah. So we're just gonna zoom by now. So that's how basically the funding came together. I'll show at the end how then the film is out, but I'm gonna pass the mics to the animation team, and they're just gonna talk through some of, such a big part of the film is animation, and I can't even draw like storyboards to save my life. And so this is really a collaboration with these amazing artists, that I still don't know. I'm excited for their presentation because I don't quite still know how they did this, so I'm gonna learn too. So Jacob, Janice.
Hi. So there's 26 minutes of animation in the movie, which took 2 years of me working on it full time, and Janice worked on it for 1 year. She did all the backgrounds, and a few other people helped out part time. 2 of them are here, Mitchell and Steph, you're sitting over there. That photo's very early on.
It's the only photo I had.
Yeah, it was a meeting at Emma's apartment, but most of the time I was working in my own apartment, which sorry about that. Yeah, it looked like that. For 2 years. I don't think there's any secret trick to how it's done. It's just patience and hard work, and like any big project, you just have to do it and keep doing the work until it's done.
Jacob, this is amazing.
Yeah, so this is a little video of the animation process. That kind of makes it look like we knew what we were doing. But it's not that straightforward. Like in there, like maybe the storyboards are badly drawn stick figures, but you can see a clear progression where the ideas are already there, and it just gets more refined drawing. But I'm going to show one scene as an example, and then go through all the bad ideas and bad drawings that we took to get there.
Hi, how did you get the idea of Curious George?
This is the beginning of the movie.
How did you invent Curious George's name? Where were you born?
Well, we have just become American citizens, and we have got tremendous concern about it.
You feel so pleased and at the same time proud of it.
It's sort of coming to rest after a little bit of moving around the world, isn't it?
The next thousand invited is especially before the United States.
We may have seen you in the newsreels.
I spoke to you, saw all these people lying on the main channels, yeah.
Well, we're glad you're here.
This is Hans and Margaret Ray, and Curious George was their creation.
Yeah, so that's at the beginning of the movie. That's our introduction to Hans and Margaret. So it's a pretty important scene to get right. This was our first stab at.
Good morning, everyone. Today we have two guests. An unusual literary couple, H.A. Ray, the well-known author, illustrator of children's books, and his author wife, Margaret. Natives of Hamburg, Germany, and they lived in France and Brazil, and now their permanent home is the United States. As a matter of fact, there's been a very significant occurrence in their lives. Suppose you tell us about that, Mrs. Ray.
Well, we have just become American citizens, and we have got tremendous concern about it.
You feel so pleased and at the same time proud of it.
sort of coming to rest after a little
Yeah.
bit of moving around the world, isn't it?
We left thousands of bicycles just before the Nazi thing.
We may have seen you in the newsreels.
I suppose so. You saw all these people flying from very sad, yeah.
Well, we're glad you're here.
Wow.
So,
It's horrible.
yeah, I mean, we really like that audio clip, but the visual is just a very literal interpretation of there that doesn't really add anything or sell it at all. So then this was my attempt to jazz it.
Natives of Hamburg, Germany, and they lived in France and Brazil, and now their permanent home is the United States. As a matter of fact, there's been a very significant occurrence in their lives just 3 weeks ago. Suppose you tell us about that, Mrs. Ray.
That did not help. I don't think you even put that in the cut ever.
Yeah.
That was just, at that point, we started from scratch. Let's see the next one.
Well, we're plastic American citizens. We have got tremendous.
So we had this idea of doing like split screen, where there's like multiple illustrations on the same page of the book, like comic panels, but it turns out that like you have that many different things on the screen at once, just your eye doesn't focus on any of them. But this is a better concept now that we're actually illustrating the story that they're telling and not illustrating them telling the story.
Oh, this is awesome.
That was a working title for a brief time. Hans and Margaret ride a bike. Yeah. Yeah.
This morning, George was curious the moment he woke up,
Now we
because
came up
he
with
knew
like transitioning into the animator world through the book illustrations. And I consolidated some of these split screens, but it's still not really adding anything. And I colored in the rough animation here, which I wouldn't normally do, but because it's the first scene, it's an awkward frame. Because it's the first scene, we wanted to be more presentable for test screenings, because otherwise like people would look at the black and white and think it was an artistic decision that the whole movie was supposed to be.
Yeah, I gotta say that just to chime in. The film, like, you know, you go have a rough cut. In our case, like, it was really rough until the very end. You know, like, most of the things look like this or worse. And the film was put together pretty much by the time we did the Kickstarter, but it was like horrific to share with people unless people couldn't see how, we always knew how it was gonna look, which is how the film is now, but we didn't have the resources. We made like a sample sequence ultimately because the test screenings weren't going well, but animation, that's the issue. Like, you just can't, you know, the rough cut is, you know, usually it's like kind of okay, like you can watch it, it really couldn't, and that was also a big challenge of the process.
Next one.
Hi. How did you get the idea of killing a George?
Then I found this tape, so
Yeah.
with the kids.
Yeah, so that turned out to be a good way to transition from showing images of the book and then showing Hans drawing the image, and then this draws on as if it's Hans's drawing. And this ship is based on the ship in the book, and Janice Rim will talk a little more about that in a minute. And now we have it filling the whole screen, and I think it's a lot better. And they're both together on one side of the screen instead of reaching across to hold hands.
And just the archival note here too, you know, until we buy it, that's what it looks like. So again, the film is really not in good shape.
And also, I think that shot ultimately got replaced with a different one because it was too expensive.
It was just also not historically accurate. Like, there were like Nazis everywhere in that shot apparently, and that didn't make sense.
Yeah, so at that point, most of the ideas are figured out. So the transitions between the shots aren't really messed around. So this is tried to do this fancy morphing
I hated
thing.
that.
It's just too distracting. We went back to like dissolve. and then we wanted to somehow transition them from the animation into the archival stuff in Paris. So that was the first attempt, and then we replaced that with like the erasing and redrawing. And that brings us. But just one quick note, if I can plug the animation software that I developed and use for the movie.
So just to explain, Jacob developed this app that you can buy for like $4, right? And then he made the film on it. Like the whole thing pretty much is made out of this app, which is incredible.
So here's Janice talking about background design.
Hi everybody, I'm Janice, and I got brought on, like it was said earlier, Jacob had brought me on. He recommended me to Emma, and first I came on as a freelancer, and thankfully Emma liked me enough to bring me on full time.
No. I gotta say, the joining this project comes with risks, and Janice was one of the people who quit her staff job that she'd had for a while after graduating, a stable, good job, to take this risk. It takes that, and I could say, okay, I can guarantee I can pay you for 4 months, and then I don't know. Ultimately, we worked out funding for a year, which is till the end of the project, but it takes these risks, and I'm glad it worked out, but it takes that kind of, I think, spirit to go for it, just to reiterate.
And it was worth it. It was very exciting to be brought on to this project. So to explain a little bit about background design, this is what I started with. This is what Jacob had before. I don't know if you animated the scene.
No, Natalie animated this.
Okay, but maybe you blocked it out first.
Yeah.
And so I think this was part of an animatic, and the rough animation was already done. And for live action, usually it goes the other way, right? You set up a set and then your actors interact within that scene. But in this case, because the rough animation was already partially done, and it takes a lot more work for animation to be adjusted rather than fixing one still background at the back. So I had to make sure, I had to figure out a layout that works with the perspective of the characters and how they already moved in and out of the scene. So the next one is basically, this is the first pass that I sent to Emma and Jacob to make sure, like, is this perspective working? Also the dominant color of the scene, you want to set the tone. And I knew that this was later in the Ray's lives, around the 70s. So you want to kind of like the arc of the film, you want to show that it's like a more seasoned period of their lives, so the dominant color would be more earthy like this. And then during the process, Emma would send me, reference photos that she found throughout. And this is the Ray's house in Waterville Valley, right? And so the couches, how his desk was set up, how his studio was set up, you would look at these and try to incorporate as much of that into the scene. And then this is the first prop, like picture with the props. I knew that there was a telescope that was really important, and the desk. And I start to realize, okay, maybe the initial layout that I had wasn't really working. The characters look like they're a little bit sinking. So I had to do an angry adjustment next. Like you can tell from the red lines, okay, is this working? But it all worked out for the best because in the middle of the production, I also got this email. Emma had reached out to the Waterville Valley residents, and they had sent her all these little trinkets that they remember seeing at the studio and what interested them. So it was nice to actually bring down the horizon line and able to show the desk more where the details would go into. And you test it, make sure the characters work well in that environment. And bring in the rug. I remember one of the residents said it was a very welcoming place. They would sit down and there were a lot of chairs and like they would interact with Mr. Ray. And next slide. You would see the little details getting more refined, making sure the shadows and just referencing to a lot of the books and a lot of the photos to mimic how Hans would have drawn this if he were in charge of this film. And then you can see the final product. point.
One shot.
That was one.
A lot of revisions. And for animated films, although this is also my first feature-length film, even for shorts, it's really important to kind of block out your color script for your film. And for this, at least, I think there's 110 animated backgrounds that I drew, and this is just a portion of it, but just to give you an idea of how color scripts work, you wanna, basically, you don't want the backgrounds to interfere with the story. You don't wanna, compete with the animation. You wanna help aid the story. So in the beginning, I wanted to make sure that it's a lot of yellows and greens and springtime so that their lives are just beginning. And then the rays were also from a luxurious background earlier in their lives. So there's a lot of warmth and gold in those 3 slides. And then, when war hits, you kind of want to help the story you want to help the audience feel that they're desperate, that they're in a cold environment, it's dire situations, and you move on to the richness of Rio, the warmth back again, and how where their lives took. And then you see how when they meet and when they go through a little bit of a romantic period, the pinks come in, and then again, the Second War, and when they had to escape the Nazis, you kind of see how hard it must have been. There's a lot of dominant dark colors throughout the film in the middle section. And then finally, like I said before, when they come back not come back, but when they come to America, it's a lot more peaceful. Even when you see the plantations throughout the film, I made a conscious decision to make sure it reflects kind of where they are in their lives. Like in the bottom here, it's in the plant is also in the shadows, but it's kind of hinting, it's at the end of their lives. It's more seasoned. It's more where they're comfortable, and it's kind of reflective of where their journey has been. So this is an example of a color script. And also, when I was brought on, I asked Jacob, okay, your characters, the rough animation at least, Hans and Margaret are missing lines in part of their faces, and I asked him, was that a conscious decision? Because his books are kind of like that, and he said, yes. And which is not surprising because he's very thorough. And after hearing that from Jacob, I knew the backgrounds, it would be fun to actually make it look like Hans drew them, and it would be more convincing if elements from his book would be part of the background. And also, I think in the middle of the film, Hans advises to one of the Waterville Valley residents that he always writes from his experience. So I thought it would be fun to work backwards, and if Hans was making this film, he would, a lot of the elements from his books would be from something that he saw when he was a child. So in his room when he was a child, I incorporated a lot of the toys that were shown in his books, and later in his life where they lived, little furnitures would be inspired by the books. And the next slide is also, Jacob said earlier, the boats. I wanted to make sure, it looks like it's part of where their journey was, and just, it's incredible to now know their story. Basically their Curious George's life is their life, and it's hard to see where it ends and where it begins.
Yeah, I mean, just hearing Janice now, the details and thought that went into it, I basically, for all aspects of the film, said, okay, how would the Rays have told their own story? That was the way I wanted to make the film. The Rays were great storytellers, and I thought we could, refer to them. So I used as much of their words as possible, and in terms of the animation, be inspired by what they created. And the Jacob and Janice, as well as the whole team, really took that request to a level that is amazing. I mean, you know, I know I directed this film, but I just feel like one of the most amazing things about filmmaking is like out of collaboration, you just end up with things that you could have never imagined yourself. I just, you know, some of these ideas were mine originally, but they were just elevated so far. And so yeah, this is why these guys were really thoughtful about every frame. You know, many trips to the libraries. We know the Curious George books like, you know, the like religious people know the Bible. You know, it's like really like we know them. So I'm gonna jump ahead because I feel like we're approaching the time. But thank you, Janice. So the one other aspect I really wanted to talk about is archival. So I'm actually going to show you just one more clip from the film that really goes through archival footage. These are the topics that Emily will cover in a second. So let's start.
By the 12th of June, Parisians could hear the cannon fire of the front, which really was about the last possible moment people could leave.
Hans recorded in his calendar diary that they left the city at 5 a.m. You could hear the tanks rolling in as they were bicycling out. It was how close they came. They pedaled south about 48 kilometers to a town called Étampes. The next morning, they pedaled 32 more kilometers to Aquabuie. Certainly, it was perilous being on these roads. Two days after they passed through Étampes, the Germans bombed the city and 400 people were killed.
The cars got all stuck on the road. There were miles and miles. But with bicycles, we could get by everywhere. So bicycles seem to be the ideal thing.
I'm gonna pause there. Just a quick note before I pass it to Emily. So as you start to see, and hopefully you'll all go see the film after this, or you've already seen it, but I really wanted to have two different levels in the film. So the animation represents the Ray's experience of their life. The anecdotes, you know, you'll learn that they called this escape from the Nazis an adventure, and that's how they approached it, and that's what the animation reflects. But the archival footage gives you the context, gives you the reality of some of the things that they went through, even if they chose not to talk about it in the way that was real. So that was the way, and sometimes you see the Rays animated into the archival background as a reminder, because you know that they were actually in places like that, and we tried to get as accurate as possible with the archival. But if you want to chat a little about the archival process, because it's brutal, you know, there's so much, there's like 40 minutes of archival footage in this film.
Hey guys, well before I start I want to say Emma and I actually met at the Fusion Docs in the Works program, so a throwback to that, so you can meet people even at this film festival. When Emma and I first started talking about this, she knew early on that she wanted it to use a lot of archival, and archival is very time consuming and very expensive, so that was kind of scary at the get-go. And what we did is, you know, we started with a treatment. So Emma had kind of said, this is what the story is going to be, this is what I'm interested in. And we broke that down into categories, and then that's kind of your Bible to start your research. And we really didn't know on the like race specific side, other than the de Grumman collection, which we'll talk about a bit later, how much stuff there was going to be. And so Emma started at the de Grumman, and that ended up being a humongous wealth of material that without their support and their letting us use their collection, this film probably would not have happened. We had like this list of interviews, and we ended up working with a researcher thinking, oh, we're going to find all these interviews, because they did tons and tons of interviews, and most of those were not saved. So that was, what are we going to do now? So it was a lot of process of what's the story, and where can we find material, and also thinking about what should be animated. And so we started doing a lot of research, and there are a number of archives that are available to access online. And so that's where we first started. And with most of that initial research, Emma was able to cut the film, Jacob started animating over material.
I'm just going to play that similar sequence as Emily talks with no sound, just of a really early version of that sequence without the master final files as she talks.
And so, you know, they were able to kind of build the story and figure out what the story was going to be. But one of the things with archival, especially with a World War II story, is that a lot of these images are seen over and over and over again. And it was really important that you felt like you were on a new journey. Because like Emma said, this was supposed to be a journey. It wasn't supposed to be the typical World War II Holocaust escape story. And we also really wanted things to be as accurate as possible. So after the film pretty much had been cut and we were close to picture lock, Emma decided that we should do a full archival pass, which was like basically start and try and replace everything with the absolute best shots that we could find. And we were really lucky. We brought on an archival producer named Adrian Wood, who is a World War II archival expert. And he was able to pretty much find these never before seen for many of these shots, super accurate visuals to bring the escape story to life. So that's what you're seeing now is kind of the general archival that we had pulled from online sources, and then what's in the film. What you're seeing is the actual escape that the Rays went on, and then Jake was able to go back and animate back into those shots. And the other thing we did, that if you are telling a 1940s story, is we really took advantage of public domain material. The public domain space in archival is really, really rich. It is a little bit of work to get into it. So one of the things you can do is you can find public domain material through sites like Critical Past online. But if you're doing a large archival project, it can be really beneficial to actually go to the National Archives yourself. And so we ended up working with the National Archives researcher and went back to the original film, got it scanned, so we were getting it fully cleaned again, fully scanned. And in that way, you're not paying by second, you're ending up paying by reel. So we would milk like an 11-minute reel, we would use a ton of that material because we're going to pay the same amount. And in that way, we're also able to get really gorgeous visuals. So that was a big part of it as well. And then it was a balancing act of like getting the archival and then getting it to Jacob and Jacob animating over it and then bringing it back into the edit. And so that was kind of a dance that we were doing constantly.
Coloring the archival before you animate it into and then coloring it after. It was a crazy online process also.
Yeah, I was running all over Manhattan. Like this time last year, I was literally like 4 or 5 places in a day. But and then we had to license a good chunk of it, which is also clearances on other people's material is a big job because you don't want to be in a situation where someone comes, like we finished the film and then someone comes out of the woodwork and is like, you didn't get permission for that. So we had to literally, for every single shot in the film that was not original, be able to document how we cleared it. And in many cases, the copyright holder doesn't exist anymore. So in that instance, you have to do really due diligence to show how you tried to track them down, and be able to prove that. So we did end up, there's the clip that you saw has Margaret, and it was a interview, I don't remember what the interview was called, but it was a show that only aired for like 4 months on a TV station that no longer exists. And we had found it because it was at the de Drummond, and we couldn't find the copyright holder, and we couldn't find a master. So like I was on the phone calling like these 90-year-old guys trying to figure out who we should be paying to get permission. In the end, we never found anybody, but I had that documented paperwork to be able to say this is what we did. And then talking a little bit about the de Drummond, I know Emma's mentioned that before, but private collections are really, really incredible. And I think the material that has really never been seen before is because of these private collections or collections in libraries that aren't usually part of a general archival search. And so there were hundreds of photos that Emma went through that really kind of bring the rays to life. And so that was a big part of it as well. And then we had to clear all of those and make sure we had permissions for those. So that was another step.
Yeah. And you know, I often get asked like, okay, Curious George, you know, he's a big, famous, rich monkey that brings in a lot of money to various people like the publisher, Houghton Mifflin, Universal, who makes the films. And so it was tricky to deal with the image of George. You know, ultimately we got full permission from all the parties, but as the film was made, it wasn't, you know, I didn't want to get in a situation where I made this film and it was up to like some person that I never met that owns George somehow to say, well, you can't do that, or you can. So there is this thing called fair use that, you know, in the US especially, it goes a really long way with documentaries, where the basic idea is that, you know, you have the freedom of speech, you know, the right to, you know, I mean, it's usually for like film, like, you know, the Scientology film, you have to deal with that because chances are that footage won't be given permission by the people you're criticizing, you know, but, you know, this really kind of for those kind of things. So we had that as a backup plan. And then ultimately we got the permission. So George, and also the fact that the Ray estate and so many of the sketches and the original work that the estate owns, I had full access to, really helped me deal with the George issue. And ultimately it all worked out. Are we basically out of time? Can I just wrap up, Susan, or?
Can we just take a few questions?
Yeah, I'm just gonna wrap up and then we'll do that. I know I'm out of time, so but hopefully no one's asleep, so I don't know, maybe this is good. Okay. Just the final, you know, okay, so what happened, right? So, basically, as I mentioned, The Orchard, who's known to have distributed Cartel Land, Life Animated, some great docs in the past few years, offered us enough money to finish the film when we still needed it after the Kickstarter. That went mainly to the licensing of these archival materials and just wrap-up costs. And then we premiered at the LA Film Festival, which was awesome. You get one world premiere of your first feature, I think, and I'll never forget it. And then the Middle Photos Rooftop Film Festival, which was in New York, also a great time where most of the crew got to come. Sam Waterston came, again, an amazing experience to be able to have someone like Sam Waterston narrate the film. It came about because his sister knew the Rays really well in Waterville Valley. And I didn't know that she was his sister for a long time, but I eventually found out and persuaded her to send it in the trailer, and immediately he called me and said, let's have lunch, and he offered to do it way before, when the film looked like terrible, like those you know, sketches, you know, so he really believed in us, and one afternoon we recorded all the lines, and it was a dream. So the festival, it's gone to some festivals, a lot of Jewish film festivals now, which pay screening fees to screen your film, like, which is great. So, you know, you should always ask if you're even, I mean, the big festivals won't ever pay you, but some of these festivals actually, your film is worth something to them for that you get paid to just screen the film. So that's really getting us some extra cash that that I knew from Emily's previous films, but I never experienced myself. Just really quickly, these are some of the outcomes of where the film is. It just was released on Hulu yesterday, so really, please go watch it. extremely excited about the airline stuff. If you're starting January 1st, if you're on Cathay Pacific or American Airlines, please take a photo and send it to me. I can't wait to like be on a flight and just like walk around and just ask if people, if they should watch this film. I've covered other things. DVDs coming out, and we really hope there'll also be an educational market for the film. We've screened at a few middle school, high schools already, and it's great. This is not really for little kids, this film, as you can probably tell, but it is really perfect for, people who grew up with the Rays and with George and are ready to learn a little more about history and the world. And finally, this just got announced. I don't even have shared it with some of you guys. So basically, I signed a deal with a Hollywood company that they're going to develop a version of this Ray story into a Hollywood film. So we'll see, hopefully it'll work out. I'm excited, and if it does, I'll be a producer on it. So there's another adventure. But just a little bit about. And I've become a Curious George expert. When you make a documentary, you become an expert in something, and that knowledge and those skills go beyond this one film. I've this summer curated a Curious George exhibit in Japan. I've directed a Japanese TV show about the Rays where we retrace their steps in Europe as a travel show. That was like my job for a few months. And I think I'll continue to, get asked to talk about this thing, and as Annie referred to this summer, and as the political times have just shifted very rapidly over the past year, the film really feels relevant, and I've been felt the responsibility to spread it in that way as well. So and just maybe I can take questions about this because there was a lot, but maybe because of the time I'll just ask for.
I'd love to hear your list.
Oh gosh, there's the biggest challenge really was that at every step of the way I didn't fully know how it was gonna go, and that's okay when it's just me. But as I hired people, then I told people that I basically got them to quit their stable jobs to join, and at each step of the way, what I tried to do was be as open as possible that I didn't quite know what was going on, and especially Jacob. I had this honesty policy where during the ups and downs of the project, I would tell him because his life was as much on the line as kind of I felt, and it really did feel like my whole life was about this for 3 years. It really, I had other jobs, but it was all for making this film. And, I did get really ill after the kicks. There were personal tolls on it, and, when you also, even now, despite the film success, it being a hit, the financial gap isn't filled. So I still owe my friends, some of the friends that started the project with me, money because they're the last ones to get paid. And that really, I wish there was a way that I could resolve that sooner than later. It kind of is on my mind until that's resolved, and that's because the budget, somehow we ended up it's costing around $600,000, and if I was more experienced towards the end, I would have been able to really hold that with music choices I made and archival choices I made, things like that. But ultimately, I really thought about what I would do differently, and I think if I did anything differently, this wouldn't have turned out this way. It was really like a magical project that taught me everything I feel like I need to know as I kicked off my career, and hopefully for a lot of my collaborators as we now go. This is a real film, but for so long it felt like not a real film, and now I kind of have the confidence that I made this. I already am working on my next films, and it helps to have done it once, and I also think that doing a Kickstarter, that experience and that being able to that in itself as an accomplishment is really open doors just in that. So all of that I feel very fortunate about because it really wasn't. It took a team, and it really came out of Tisch, and that's why I'm really grateful that I'm here. And hopefully some of this is useful for you guys because it really wasn't that long ago when I was in this room, or 3.5 years ago now, when this was just an idea with no money and no I just had a vision and felt like I knew how to do it, and I didn't want to go to a big company and get a great EP on it, and I just wanted to do it ourselves, and I felt like I had the friends to do it. So yeah, that's how it is. questions? Yes.
I was curious.
You're curious?
Curious. When you were launching the Kickstarter, I guess maybe in hindsight, do you think, is there an ideal time in a project to launch a Kickstarter? Like, could you have done it any sooner? And then also kind of with that, I was wondering if you could touch on like the moment when you felt like you could stop being protective of the idea, because with the Kickstarter that became a very
Right.
thing.
Yeah. So the Kickstarter really happened in the second year, the third year, the beginning of the third year out of a 3-year project. I think it was a perfect time. I'd considered it earlier, but when you're so far off from, projects do it at every stage, and there's a good reason for it depending on the project. For me, it didn't make sense until we were at least, if we could raise $100,000, but we still needed $300,000 more. It was hard for me to justify, publicly how we could promise this film to be made, because now I have faith in that will bring other money, but at the time I felt like, that's all it's gonna bring and I can't finish it. And we also wanted to at least share, I needed to have the confidence that it was gonna get done, and also like share the trailer for the Kickstarter, it looks like the final film, and that took a while to get there. We had to shoot everything. So I think that's a good time, towards the end of a project. Personally, it worked for me. And protecting the idea, for me, I was really nervous until I had the right support. I had the estate support, I had certain consultant support, and some of them were kind enough to sign exclusive agreements so that, they wouldn't even be involved in a project until however many months after this film is out, things like that. They really made me comfortable. But even without that paperwork, I gained the support of the community and the people that knew the raise, and at that point I felt like no one could come in and knock me out. But I did always feel like I had to keep moving quickly, because Hollywood, there's been other rumors and not rumors of this project in a fictional form as well. So I was always on a time clock, because of that feeling that I have to get it out before anyone else. Yeah.
How did you figure out the estimated amount of money that you had to raise to produce the film?
I didn't. I had no idea how much money it was gonna cost. I mean, maybe Emily did, because that's that's what she's good at that. But I almost didn't believe her. I kept telling, I had no idea.
So we made a budget early on, and our goal was to be at 300,000, because an indie doc is usually around 300,000. But with the archival and the animation, that was tough. So I actually $600,000 for what we pulled off is pretty good. I think when you see this, it's probably more typical to be in $1 million film. So
yeah. But it was, for me, practically, it was each time, how much money do I need to do a 3-day shoot, how much money do I need to hire Jacob for a week? It was really that unit. And then even the Kickstarter, I knew it wasn't worth doing it unless we could raise at least that much, but I knew I needed more, and I didn't really know how we were going to get it. I just knew that was the next step. I must say again, maybe one day I'll get paid for my work as 3 years of being director, editor, producer on this. I haven't yet, and I don't expect it for a while. So it's definitely not for the money, but it's more than that for sure.
Also too, when we first started talking about doing the Kickstarter, the proposed goal was much higher, I believe.
Yeah, it was Bill Nye.
Was it 300?
They convinced me, I could do more, but
so it was 300 or 400 that, when Emma and I first started talking about it. And it was, and another thing to answer your question about, when is a good time, I remember as well, it was you get to this point in your filmmaking process where there is an urgency, and you're like, I need this money, so I should do a Kickstarter for this amount. And that's not necessarily a good plan, because a Kickstarter campaign is just one part of the overall funding process. Just like your initial $200K that she did before the Kickstarter, that was important. So as you're figuring out your budget and you're saying, okay, if it's going to be around $600K, you also have to ask yourself how much of that is realistic for a Kickstarter, because we started with about 300, 400 goal. And eventually working with Kickstarter themselves and looking at the audience potential and our network potential, it was clear that if we put this goal at over 200, we're risking not reaching the goal. And that's kind of the big choices that you have to make as well.
I'm curious, I mean, you had different funding options that you outlined. One is your fiscal sponsor.
Yeah.
So anyone who gave to that got like a nonprofit donation sort of thing. That's not in conflict with any other distribution you might do on this.
Yeah, no. They're just donations. When we got investors, we just had to keep that money separate.
So how, that was my question. So how did you differentiate? Why would an investor invest instead of getting the nonprofit credit?
Because they hope that they'll make the money back. I suppose the donations, they'll never get the money, and I hope also it might take a few years, but things like I say like a few years because we got a chunk of money to sell it to Hulu, but it's like paid quarterly over the next 3 years, so things like that. But I am pretty optimistic that the investors will get the money back, and I think that's why basically to risk that.
Well, and I'll just also add, with a tax deductible donation, you can immediately write that off, immediately. The investors, like Emma just said, you have to wait. So it's kind of a choice that you as the funder make.
Can you talk about your project now that you're working on?
Sure. So I finished this film this spring, and although I've come back a lot to New York and the US for screenings and events, I basically shifted my base to Tokyo. I grew up in the west of Japan. I haven't lived in Japan as an adult, but over the course of being in the US for full time for 9 years, I really started to feel like I want to make some films, documentaries about Japan to share with the West. Like I felt an urgency to share some things that are going on there that I feel like haven't quite reached the outside world. And so I moved there. We also have the 2020 Olympics in Tokyo, so it's been my since that was set like a 8-9 year goal to be there around that time. There's a lot of opportunities as the world looks at us and stories to be told, and I want to be part of the storytelling. So I've basically been there. I'm here a lot as well, and there I've picked my next film to be about high school Japanese baseball. Very different. Someone's like, is it gonna be animated? I'm like, no. But just briefly, baseball is as big or bigger in Japan as a sport as it is in here, and I love it. And but it's a very different sport. In high school, the baseball tournament in the summer is kind of like a combination of the World Series and March Madness here. It's the biggest sporting event of the year. In Japan, if you're in high school and you play baseball, you have to shave your head. You practice 360 days a year, 7 to 8 hours a day. It's the closest thing. It's quite militaristic and very extreme, but in a way represents the hardworking teamwork, building skills that Japan is known for. So the film hopes to, and it's the 100th tournament next summer. So I plan to film some teams and some characters as they try to reach their field of dreams next summer, and use it as a reflection onto Japanese society and also the way it's changing.
Could everybody talk about what they're working on?
Yeah.
I'm currently working for Nickelodeon's preschool show called Blaze and the Monster Machines, and I'm doing storyboard revisions for that and started doing that this past summer.
I'm doing freelance animation work and also continuing to develop my app and sell that.
I work as a freelance producer, distribution, marketing mostly, and I'm working on a few different projects. So essentially, and what's happening, there's so many great filmmakers out there, so many great films that are being made, but it's getting tougher and tougher to get traditional distribution. And so self-distribution, or at least taking certain windows within distribution, like your broadcast, your theatrical, your VOD, what's becoming really popular is self-distributing. And when a filmmaker kind of comes to this crossroads with a really great film of theirs, and they realize, if I don't do self-distribution, no one's gonna see this film. That's where they kind of bring me on board. And so I come on and I will help them self-distribute their film, whether it's educational or their festival run. And right now I'm working on a slew of awesome films that have shown at great festivals, and they're available, and they have all of these cool different kind of impact campaigns. One's called Blood Stripe, You can see that on iTunes right now, about a female veteran. That's a narrative feature. Another film is a documentary about Highlights magazine. So that's been fun because the audience is sort of similar with this Curious George documentary. And a couple of other TV series and projects that I'm working on right now.
I'm working at a company called 0.0. I'm the archival producer there on a series for CNN about Detroit in the early 60s.
We have a lot of food to share with everyone, and I think people want to continue to talk with us, and eat. So
Thank you so much.